All right, welcome everybody to a very exciting webinar that we've been planning for a while. The Accessible Playground webinar, everything you need to know to get started on creating an accessible playground in your community. This webinar is sponsored by the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities and Wisconsin Facets. Both of our organizations have gotten lots of inquiries about accessible playgrounds. And so we decided to work together to offer this presentation to get more information out to people, even if it's just to get you started thinking about this in the future. So I am going to have the speakers introduce themselves before we get started. Nancy, you're first on my screen.
Hi, my name is Nancy Gopinski. My pronouns are she, her. I'm from Glendale, Wisconsin, and I'm the parent of two kids, Ben and Zoe. And Ben is on the autism spectrum, and that's how I got involved a lot with the BPDD and went through the partners in policymaking training.
Thanks. John.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Kelleher. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Brookfield. Jenny, thanks for having me today. Most recently, we completed an inclusive playground at one of our major community parks at Worth Park here in Brookfield. And Jenny asked me to talk about some of the strategies that we use in our planning process. And I look forward to sharing that with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ginger.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ginger Pugh, and I was on the committee to build the accessible playground. That was the first one in Oshkosh, and like that kind of started the ball rolling across the state as to accessible playgrounds. Thank you.
So we have a viewpoint of a parent, a community member, and a park and rec leader. And I happen to be a parent who has a disability and was able to play with my kids for the first time at the Oshkosh playground. So we are now going to pull up the PowerPoint. Just give me a quick minute. Nancy, is that the correct view?
I can see it pretty well. Are others able to see it pretty well?
Just the one slide, though.
Yeah, I just see one slide.
All right. So, John, we are going to have you go first.
Great. So you'll control the slide distribution, Jenny?
Yes, just let me know when you want me to advance.
All right. Well, again, my name is John Kelleher. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Brookfield. You can move ahead, please. And one of the things I'd like to talk to you about today is how do you start planning for an inclusive playground? Next slide. So there are several topics here that I'm going to touch on briefly. I think it's important for everybody to realize that what Jenny, myself, Ginger, and Nancy are sharing today are some of the experiences that we've gone through, but there's no one correct way to do these types of projects. I think it's really important that you start to understand what your organization or community needs are, and you have to find a process that's going to fit and work well for your community. So today we're going to talk about a variety of things during my portion of the presentation. We're going to ask, what does your community want or need? Location, location, location. It can be very important in the planning process. Site amenities. What does it take to make your site successful for an inclusive playground? Selecting a consultant and a contractor for the process. Who will build your playground? Building your budget, and then a few final tips and takeaways. So, what does your community want or need? I think it's really important for the individuals or the team that's put together to start to identify what the needs are for the community as a whole. The concept of having a fully inclusive and accessible playground is phenomenal. And I don't think anybody's ever going to question if that's something that would be nice to have in a community or at a school or at a location. But the challenge that you have is how do you pull that together and how do you get the community to get behind what you're trying to do? So number one is I think you want to try to identify who the stakeholders are going to be. And if once you identify those stakeholders, can you determine if you think you're going to have community support to move forward with the project? Some of the groups that you may want to consider being part of the stakeholder groups, excuse me, include schools, potentially municipal government agencies, any special interest groups you have in your community, community groups, JCs, organizations, Rotary clubs, etc. And then ultimately, I think you have to find different people with different skills to build a playground committee that can help steer the process for you. And then ultimately, you're going to have some community engagement to really get an understanding of what your community wants and needs are. Now, Ginger's going to talk a little bit about community engagement later, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on that today because Ginger will touch on those things as we move forward. Next slide, please. So location, location, location. I'd like to share a story with you about a past practice that I went through when we actually developed a skate park. And I think it's really important to understand that there's some parallels with an inclusive playground versus a skate park. And so here's what we kind of went through when we looked at locations. We had to determine within the city of Brookfield, what is the best location for a skate park? Okay. And so we evaluated public property, we evaluated current city parks that we own and manage, we evaluated school district property, any private lands that might be donated. And then once we established what those various properties were that could potentially house the skate park, or in this case, potentially a playground, then you had to start looking at access to the property. Is it easy to get to it? Is there roads and parking lots available? Things of that nature. And then identify what the impact may or may not be to a neighborhood. Noise, traffic, vandalism, the volume of people that may be coming. Because if you've all heard the NIMBY approach, is people don't want certain things in their backyard, right? But the reality of it is, if you plan appropriately, most people are comfortable with it in their backyard as long as you show your due diligence in determining a location that's going to make sense for the project. Next slide, please. So, site amenities. What does this really mean? Well, in our case at the Worth Park Playground Project, this is one of our major community parks. So we were fortunate enough to have a lot of the amenities as part of the process. So do you have access via a major connection road or some sort that's very easy to find? Do you have the parking that's necessary, parking lots, to accommodate the use of the facility that you're designing? Do you have restroom facilities available? Do you have something that is what I would call a traditional restroom? If you look at the picture on the right side of the slide, that is a very traditional restroom facility. It was built in the 1970s. It does have ADA accessible stalls and things of that nature because we want to make sure we're accommodating people, but it doesn't necessarily have all the nice things that you'd want in a truly accessible location, which might include things as not just a men's and a women's restroom, but it may include a family or independent restroom that has all the necessary amenities from youth and adult changing tables to appropriate heights of sinks, so on and so forth. So if somebody needs some assistance or in a place to go to use the restroom, for example, you have an opportunity to do that instead of just being segregated or put into the general public. So what type of restrooms do you have? Or do you have portable toilets? And we all know how much we love those. Do you have water fountains available? Or is it accessible by bikes? Do you have bike racks available for kids and families that are riding there? Are the pathways to the playground accessible? Not only the playground needs to be that, but are the pathways there? Do you have the appropriate signage and recognition? Do you have any shade? If you built it in an area that has a lot of mature trees and you're able to fit it in the middle of those, which we were fortunate enough to do, you're going to have shade. But if you build a playground in the middle of an open play field at a school district site or a park, there's no shade at all. Shade can be very important for people to stay longer and enjoy their experience without getting overheated in the course of a hot summer. And then, of course, there's benches and picnic tables and things like that. So site amenities are important to have in your thought process when you're thinking about a playground, because if you don't have some of these things, that's going to add cost to the project as you move forward. Next slide, please. So everyone, you get the people on board. Everyone thinks it's going to be a great idea to build this playground. Everyone's excited about it. And now you get into the reality of how do you get this done? There's several different ways you can go about this after you determine what a site plan or site location may be. But you may want to consider selecting a consultant or a contractor that has engineering capabilities to evaluate the playground site that you're going to use. And you may think, well, why do you really need that? It's a flat piece of ground and we're just going to put the playground in and it's going to be great and we don't have to worry about anything. But things that come into play are potentially, if you have a large surface area, you may have to have stormwater management. You may require some civil plans to get that stormwater management to work properly and make sure it drains properly. Is the site graded to meet the overall needs? So this can be provided through a contract with a civil engineering firm, a private firm. In my case, we use some city staff. We have engineering teams on staff or individuals that can do that work for us. Or you may have to contract with somebody. And then the second phase is playground vendors. Are you going to do a request for proposals from the various playground vendors that can provide the type of playground that you're looking for? And what is the process to select them? Is it vendor based on qualifications and then you design the playground, or are they submitting something in a different format? And the next slide will talk a little bit more about that. So, request for proposals for a playground vendor. These are two examples of things that you may need to do for a significant project. One way is doing a not to exceed bid ceiling. So in my case, our playground, our bid ceiling was $1 million. Okay. We put out to the playground vendors the bid ceiling amount. We had developed some guidelines and expectations on what we were looking for. We have that maximum price, which was to include all the installation, site prep, and setup. And what those contractors then did is they put a proposal together. It gave them the creativity to design it on their own. Some of them presented to us more than one option to consider. And then those came in, and then our playground committee evaluated all of those types of proposals based on play value, number of play components, accessibility, a variety of other topics. And ultimately, we could select a playground through the not to exceed bid ceiling. But there are other ways to do it. Qualification-based selection really gives you a little bit more flexibility as a committee, a playground committee, to really get involved. This is where you may request proposals from the vendors. You may select them based on those past experiences, and then your committee actually gets involved and has workshops and collaborative efforts to design what you want the playground to look like. I don't think either way is a bad way to go in this particular case. Sometimes if you get too many cooks in the kitchen, it gets difficult to have a really effective playground design process. But the flip side of that is you're going to get more community input if you go the route of qualified or qualification-based selection. Next slide, please. Once you determine what direction you're going there, then you got to decide who's going to build it. I've seen a lot of different things done over the years. You can have the playground contractors to actually put the playground in for you, so they're meeting the specifications. That's part of the cost analysis that you evaluate. You could purchase the equipment directly and have municipal staff put the playground in. This can be done, but you have to make sure that the community or the school district, whatever the site may be, actually has the manpower to accomplish this in a reasonable time frame. Or you can go the different route of doing a community volunteer build project, where this is where it's a real time sucker. It's a heavy lift for volunteers, but I've seen many successful playgrounds be implemented this way, where you actually get community members to volunteer their time. You have a general lead contractor that brings all the materials into the site, and they guide you to actually build the playground. And now you've got good old boots on the ground effort by your community to physically construct a playground and put it into place. So each one has its different elements to it, and each one has different challenges. But this is something that you may want to think about in the planning process, because it can drive what direction you go to select how you build your playground. Next slide, please. So then you got to get into the budgeting process once you start evaluating some of these things, is what can you actually afford to do? My best recommendation, if you want to build a playground in your community, is to reach out to a handful of playground providers, ask them to share some of the most recent projects that are in reasonable distance from the area that you live in, find out about what those cost, an approximate budget number, and physically go take a look at them. Numbers can be deceiving sometimes based on what you truly get for value in terms of what the playground is. A rubber surface playground, that can be sometimes 30 to 35% of the cost of the actual project, as an example. So you have to understand what you're looking to do and what you can actually afford. Then you start looking at the different planning stages of developing your budget. Is the land available through the city of Brookfield, as example? Yes or no? If not, where do we get the land, and is it going to cost us anything? Do we need to hire a civil engineer? Do we have to have a survey done and inspection done on the playground installation? Yes or no? How big of a playground do you want? What type of surfacing do you want? Should we put fencing around the playground? Do we want to include those other amenities such as picnic tables and bike racks? And ultimately, you start putting together your list of things that need to be done to make this playground special, and you can start putting numbers to what that budget's going to actually cost. That's really important before you can even consider doing fundraising, because if you don't know what your target is and what your funding sources may be, fundraising can be a challenge. And Nancy will talk more about fundraising in a little bit. Next slide, please. So if you have a laundry list of things you'd like to have for a playground, you don't always have to build it the first day. You may want to put it into a phasing approach where maybe you want to get the playground in and then you're raising more money and then you add the pathways and do other things so you can accomplish your task of getting things done. It's not always ideal to phase every component of what you're doing, but there can be some logic to help your project be successful, and you can spread the load out and maybe out throughout some budgets as well. Revenue or funding mechanisms is really important. If you're relying on municipal government or a school district to contribute to a project, you want to make sure that they're including it in their capital programs within their budget cycles, their annual budget cycles. A lot of times you're working on those things multiple years in advance, so it's earmarked, so it's on the radar, so to speak, and then ultimately you can get approval through that process if it's going to be one of your sources. And then the fundraising process, again, Nancy will touch on that more, but who, what, where, and how is that going to get done to meet your objectives? Next slide, please. So this is a very simple high-level budget breakdown of kind of what we did for the playground in Brookfield. So our general playground was just over $1 million. We spent approximately $15,000 on fencing. We had about $25,000 in concrete work for a picnic area and the curbing that goes around the rubber surfacing to hold that in place. There's restoration, getting grass to grow again around the construction site. We bought some picnic tables, some nice ones that'll have wheelchair accessibility on the end, so we have complete access and accessibility. We're purchasing some benches. We're recognizing our donors on some signage. We actually had to hire a security firm for 3 days to keep watch on the poured in place surfacing that took place in our project, because when you pour that, you got to keep everybody off of it. And so we hired a private security firm to give us 24-hour surveillance during that time frame, and it was worth it because they were turning people away on a regular basis, more out of curiosity than wanting to do damage. But curiosity can lead to walking on that surface, and then you got to tear it out and do it over. We always put contingency in. It was 5% of our overall budget. So our budget estimate was basically 1.16 million on this particular project. Now, your project might only be $111,000. It's really irrelevant what the number is, but you have to think about what those expenses are going to be. And then you can see what our funding sources were for this particular project. Our common council was on board with doing a community type facility of this nature. So they invested 50% of the costs. We were assigned some rescue fund money back when COVID was taking place for an additional 25%. And then we were responsible for raising 25% through fundraising, which we did reach our target and our goal. And that's why we have a great playground today. Next slide, please. So just a couple final comments here. Understand what your community needs. Make sure you get the right input. Evaluate the location that you want it to be in. Location does matter. Site amenities, what do you have and what do you need? And then budgeting to determine how you're going to fund a project of this nature is critical. And then ultimately you're going to get to the construction and installation. So those are just some ideas for you to think about as you start to think about a major community-based playground that has accessibility opportunities for people. And again, it's not the only way to do things, but it's just a general high level of overview of what you got to think about when you start taking on a task of this nature. One more slide, I think, Jenny. So if you are interested in reaching out to me later on, if you start your project 6 months from now, 12 months from now, here's my contact information. And of course, Jenny can share that with all the participants. I'd be more than happy to have a side conversation with anybody if they have any questions at a later date. Thank you, everybody, and I'll turn it back to Jenny.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful. Really good nuts and bolts information to get people really thinking about what you're taking on here. So next we're going to go to talk about the community aspect of getting an accessible playground together. Let me get to, there you go, Ginger.
So when we when like the idea of an accessible playground team started, it was basically two people having a conversation and scratching their heads like, you know, we don't have one. Maybe we look at like how our community could benefit from this, how people's abilities could be increased by using this type of playground. And then as the start of our project, we applied for a Sparks grant through the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. And we used that to start our conversations. Next slide, please. So what our Sparks grant helped was an inclusion awareness carnival where we invited the community to the Sunnyview Expo Center to like give everybody like an opportunity to like learn about what we were trying to create and undertake, and what that carnival, we had over 800 people attend. Next slide, please. As you see here, we had raffle baskets. We had like kids games that they could earn tokens for, and then go to like other section and like use those tokens to pick out a prize. Next slide, please. and our our carnival had a lot of moving parts to it because we had like carnival games that the raffle baskets, and then we had like fun house, like the giant inflatable bounce houses and stuff, and the highlight of the carnival was kids that could come like dunk their principal in the dunking because every school from like elementary up through the high schools here in Oshkosh heavily promoted that weekend for us. Next slide, please. And as you can see, we had a great time. The kids had a wonderful time. Next slide, please. We even got the TV station from the Fox Valley region to cover our carnival, and one of our committee members was always in the public address system, like creating the feel of inclusion by saying very positive things for people to maybe like spark a conversation. Next slide, please. So now we get to the dunk tank. And like 9 principals lined up for like their hour in the dunk tank. So, and this one principal, Mr. Connect, that I think, he actually wore a tuxedo in the dunk tank, and I even like had a chance to dunk him in the tank. Next slide, please. So, to recap what I talked about, our carnival started the conversation of inclusion from family, friends, and like the whole community. And every school advertised the event. There were local media, as I said, 2 papers, a radio station, and Channel 26 out of Green Bay. It was a true community volunteer effort because we had like high school students and university students volunteer for like the games or help in the kitchen with food. We had 101 volunteers and over 800 people attended our carnival. Next slide, please. And this is the opening night of our playground where everything was completed and we had another community event to cap it off by inviting the community for a cookout. Next slide, please. As you can see, this is a collage of how the evening went, like with the like ribbon cutting and like everybody getting something to eat and enjoying the evening. As you can see in some of these pictures, a line did start forming with the kids that were very eager to get playing on the playground. Next slide, please. And this is how it looked after the construction fence was removed. And all of our signage was donated by a friend of mine that has cerebral palsy, and she designed all of her signage over Facebook Messenger. Next slide, please. And we did like receive the Community Partnership Award at the State of the City address in March of 2016. And in the right picture is like our whole playground committee that we came together as like a group one last time to get a picture taken. Next slide, please. I think this is it. Okay, our inclusive playground won't be on our wildest dreams because it created community-wide awareness of inclusion. It affected future city planning with more accessibility. Surrounding towns, parks, businesses are more engaged in how can I make my business more user friendly for the disabled. Oshkosh Inclusive Park continues to be a model for other communities around the state. Next slide. And like they said, we started with like going to our city council and the parks board, and then once we received like what they were looking for in terms of funds we needed to raise and things of that nature, we started talking at the Oshkosh Farmers Market at like going down there every weekend just to make a presence that, hey, we want to try and get something good in the community going. We did have local service groups help us all the way through fundraising and beyond. Our local businesses and Chamber of Commerce helped us too. Next slide, please.
That's your last slide, Ginger.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So as you can see, getting the community involved is a really important piece of this process. Because not only will they donate, but they're also going to help drum up interest. And I think you did a really great job in Oshkosh showing how many different community groups you could get together to make this happen. So, 800 people at that carnival is a huge amount of people. And making sure you get the media involved and all the aspects that you demonstrated there. And I will say Oshkosh is the one group that we typically refer people to when we get questions about accessible playgrounds. So you've done a lot of work with other communities and helping them figure this out. Very much appreciated. All right, so this all sounds great, right? But how are we going to pay for it? So here comes Nancy to give you lots of ideas of how you can make that happen.
Hello again. Our playground is located in Glendale, Wisconsin at Parkway Elementary School. And we were actually one of the groups that benefited from the knowledge and experience of the great folks in Oshkosh. And actually, I went to a training that I think Ginger and Pam, who were with their committee, had put on that was particularly helpful. Next slide, please. So our project was a joint effort between the Glendale River Hills School District, the Parkway and Glen Hills Parent Teacher Organization, or PTO, and then the Glendale River Hills School District Foundation. So our PTO tends to put on more of the teacher appreciation events and smaller events within the schools. And then our foundation was known for more of the capital campaigns or bigger fundraising for larger projects. So this is how we all kind of came together. Our school district had made a commitment then to also put in a good portion of the funds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. One of the things that we were fortunate enough to be part of was we were a committee that was formed through the PTO, but then we were also a lot of the parents were also involved with the foundation, and so between the two, we were able to utilize the nonprofit foundation status or the 501c3 status, so we didn't have to apply to become our own nonprofit or anything like that. A couple other things of note about the Glendale River Hills School District. At the time of our project, there were about 514 students at Parkway. There were about 11,000 students in the district total. There's 2 schools in our district, and about 9% of those students in the district had disabilities, and about 31% of our district at that point was considered economically disadvantaged. It's a really awesome school district in that it's very diverse. So you meet people from all different backgrounds, and that's one of the things we love most. And it's also something that we highlighted throughout our fundraising process. Next slide, please. So this is most of our steering committee. As you can see, it's kind of a small group. So I love this quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." That was by Margaret Mead, and I'm sure some of you have seen that before. Really, it was formed with district parents for the most part. One of the moms, her son had broken his leg and he was in a wheelchair for a little bit. And he realized just how boring the playground was. And she's like, this is bad. And then a couple of us had kids with disabilities and we're like, this isn't very accessible. And then my daughter was in class with a little boy who used a wheelchair. And I recall seeing a class picture of all of his classmates standing on top of a piece of playground equipment and him sitting alone in his wheelchair underneath. And I knew that the teacher was really good about getting him out of his wheelchair and, taking him down the slides and things like that. But I mean, how long can you do that? He was in kindergarten at that time. Pretty soon he wasn't going to have a lot of opportunities to play on equipment that was accessible. So that's kind of what got us all going. And then that's where our committee formed. Our committee pretty much was, also made up of special education teachers, and occupational, physical, and speech therapy also played a big role in helping us design the playground later on. A PE teacher who's also a district parent, she was really helpful as well. And they really took the lead on guiding what the equipment itself would look like. And also, of course, were helpful with the fundraising. Next slide, please. So our timeline was back in 2015 is when we began the process. That's when our PTO committee formed to get going. In the summer of 2015, we too applied for a Sparks grant through the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and we got one. And that helped us really with a lot of technical support, and as well as some money to help get the word out about our project. And we used that really to help fund our fall color run. And so that was a run walk, and you can see a couple photos there from the run walk. One of the things that the BPDD was really great about helping us with right away was really trying to get that community involvement, and also to try to highlight how how this would benefit people at all stages in life. So in the one picture, you see my mom actually in a wheelchair, and my husband push her around through the color run in her chair so that she could participate too. And so really that's a big piece of it, right? Like we all benefit from accessibility. So then it was basically 2 years of so much fundraising. And then in the summer of 2017, right before school was starting, they actually installed the playground. And then we bookended the whole thing by having another run walk in the fall and having that be our opening night for our playground. So go to the next slide. Sorry, I get a little nervous, so I'm trying not to talk too fast. And also, anyway, fundraising, who knew? Didn't. So really, like, none of us were professional fundraisers. We were parents in the district. Truly, at the time that I got involved with it, I really thought the foundation was probably filled with people who were CEOs at corporations, and really, like I later learned, it's just a lot of committed parents mostly, some of them with different types of jobs, right? And so I had a background more in human services. But I got very involved right away. How we thought it would go was we thought we'd get a couple big grants, right? And that didn't really happen. We certainly applied for lots of big grants, but we didn't get them. Actually, the grant we got was the Sparks grant, and that was a smaller one, but we're very grateful for it. But that's not what we pictured. We pictured large corporate donors. There's some, quite a few automobile dealerships in our area, and we thought, oh, they're going to really want to get behind it. We thought, this one bigger company is housed on their international headquarters are in Glendale. Everybody kept saying, oh, call them, get in touch with them. We did. We didn't get anything from them. It just sort of how it went. Where did we get the donations? It was lots of smaller donations. So it was a lot of things from like, we got to know the different service organizations like the North Shore Rotary and Kiwanis Club. They ended up donating. We ended up having a lot of smaller donations through different, families in the district, just the community at large. Kids got involved with like their Pennies for Parkway project, and like the Girl Scouts, some of their cookie money went to the playground, and then also they did these little booograms at Halloween that they sold. So a lot of little donations adding up. We thought that we could get it done in a year. No, it took 2. And then our biggest contributors really were the school district investing from their general maintenance fund, our foundation, and our PTO. And the foundation and PTO funds actually represented a lot of work that went in and a lot of smaller events and donations through the years preceding us starting our project. So we certainly raised a lot of money in the 2 years, but I really have to say that there were parents that came before us that had put in a lot of time, also, raising money for their PTO. And y'all might be kind of wondering how much money we raised, kind of like what John said, every month. It doesn't totally matter because every project's going to be kind of different. But I have to tell you, I was shocked that I really could not remember. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you, Nancy.
Uh-oh, I think we lost her.
Oh, not anymore, huh?
We'll have to give her a minute to get back on.
Okay.
I couldn't find my mute button quick enough.
While we're waiting for Nancy to get back on board, I'll talk a little bit about our fundraising to fill some time, and then I'll shut off as soon as she gets back. But we had an extensive process. Our playground committee did basically. Nancy, you back? Can you give it a shot?
So sorry, my screen went totally blank.
Okay.
I apologize.
I can talk more later then.
What I was saying, I was starting to say was just a little, thank you, John, was a little bit about how much we raised. And I was shocked that I didn't really remember the full amounts. And I called my friend Lisa, she didn't either. And we were both like, wow. And we realized that it's sort of like having a baby, your mind sort of blocks out all the labor and pain that you go through. And then you see the baby and you're so excited. And so we had to kind of look back. So I think basically like our PTO put in 45 grand, our foundation put in 50 grand, our school district put in 50 grand for the playground itself. But they also took care of some of that, the leveling the field and the civil engineering stuff John had referenced before. They also put in money there. So that was basically it. And I can talk a little bit more about some of the smaller fundraisers in a minute. Next slide, please. One of the early things that we did was try to really develop our message. So one of the big things, and I don't think I knew the term at the time, but we kind of had a sense of what we wanted to make sure we were careful of. And that was using that, I don't know if you guys have heard the term inspiration porn, but that refers to, when that's when it's meant to use people with disabilities to make non-disabled people feel good or reduce disabled people into objects of inspiration, and not seeing them fully, right? So as fully realized human beings with the same needs and wants. So we really didn't want to end up going down that road. And that, I think it's one of those thin lines, right? You want to be able to inspire people to want to give and to participate in this project, but you definitely don't want to objectify anybody. So we were careful of that. We really tried to always focus on, this is about building community. We didn't want to make it about charity or pity. We wanted to demonstrate all the way through how everybody benefits from accessibility. People using strollers, people using wheelchairs, people using walkers, all of us just having those interactions with people when we're all included and we can all get to know each other. One of the first things we did was we named our project. So we called it Play Together at Parkway, or the Parkway Playground Project. And then our motto was life is better when we play together. And so we tried to kind of use that on a lot of things, and in advertising and promoting, and it was fun. We picked a logo, and I have to tell you, we kind of kept moving around a little bit with the logo. One of the things we ended up doing, and this was encouraged through the BPDD technical support, they said, make sure you're really involving the kids at the school, because it's going to be their playground, right? And so we had a t-shirt contest design, and different kids, a lot of kids participated and sent in these t-shirt designs. And then we had a committee at the school, some art teachers and parents and stuff, and selected this one. And then we started using some of the visuals from this one on a lot of things that we sent out. One of the other things we did was we gathered some data that would support our efforts. A site that can be helpful is the Wisconsin School Report Cards. So sometimes when you're applying for grants or you're talking to community groups, it's good to be able to say, like, how many people go to your school, and how many people have disabilities who attend, how many students have disabilities. And sometimes some grants might be really targeted toward economically disadvantaged areas. And so if you have, depending on your situation, you might be able to get some data that could be helpful that way. So like different grants target different groups. And so it's good to have that data, and that's a good place to get it. And the school district also can probably help you with that as well. Next slide, please. So then we just really tried to get the word out. So the foundation every year puts out a letter toward the end of the year, asking for money, donations, and then also highlighting whatever projects that they're working on and projects they've done in the past. And so at the time, they were also trying to raise some money for a capital campaign to put an innovative learning lab in the middle school. So a lot of our fundraising was kind of within the foundation, really was split between our two projects that we were working on. So some of us who started out with the PTO also joined the foundation as trustees. And so there was a lot of people wearing different like little hats, like I'm wearing my PTO hat or I'm wearing my foundation hat today. We showed up at everything. So if there were back to school nights or events at the schools, we would show up, and we'd have we had information about the playground that we were trying to build, where we were at with our fundraising effort. Kids made some buttons that we could give out free with a donation, that kind of a thing. And that got kids really excited about it. We went to parades. If there was like the 4th of July parade, we passed out information with a QR code that would link to where they could donate. We got the press and media involved. And then toward the end, we did another big push by sending out a letter campaign that went to the whole area, and our district helped us with that in terms of the addresses and such. And so that was sort of a snapshot of some of our efforts, and then I'll share some more. Next slide, please. So some of the other things we did, we wrote a press release right away. So that helped us get that media at our events. And our district really helped us with those contacts to the different local media like the local papers and television stations. We had sponsors for our events, in addition to asking people to maybe just sponsor the project, in general, organizations and businesses. So then once a business was a sponsor for one of our events or for the playground, we really tried to support that business. We liked and followed them. All of us did. We tried to encourage other people to do the same. Some of us wrote Google and Yelp reviews highlighting their community connections and saying things like, this, in addition to having the best cheese curds in the city of Glendale, they care about the community. They're invested. They do all these fundraising projects, including our accessible playground. And so really trying to highlight that we're all in it together and we're all community. We went ahead and had our own website, and I have since taken it down, so I wasn't able to link to it for y'all today. But basically, you know, I look back now and I wonder, did we have to have a website of our own? I don't know. Like, we definitely needed a place where you could house your information. So if you created flyers, you had pictures and things like that, you wanted to have some things that are easy to get out to people, you wanted to have a website they could link to, right? But we might have been able to use the school district site and have a page there or something like that. So I would encourage you to see what your options are before you go down the road of building a website, though it wasn't that bad. Like, there's a lot of website builders that can be pretty helpful with that. I hadn't had a lot of experience with that. I'd only done one before that, and it was okay. The school was also helpful with getting our message out. They had Thursday folders, they called them, which was a weekly school bulletin that would go out. They did district newsletters a couple times a year, and then we would make sure we had articles in those. You know, we went to like the school functions, like I mentioned, and then at key moments we would utilize like the alert system in a way, not like it's scary, something bad has happened alert, but just where parents have signed up to maybe get communication, a call or a text or an email when something is coming up. So like we would say like, hey, it's the last day to sign up for this event, or event, please join us, that kind of thing. So we use that a little bit sparingly, and but that was effective as well. We posted, our social media of choice was Facebook, but there's so many more now than even when we worked on our project. So I would just say go with the ones you're most comfortable with, the people working on your team, because and where it seems like it's got the most traction within your own community. Develop an elevator speech, and that means just a quick way of talking passionately and quickly about your project, because sometimes you only have a couple minutes to really get someone's attention and engage them. Create a one-pager or brochure. So we had a brochure, and we also did the little one-pager, sometimes flyer kind of things that we pass out, like at the grade that you see there, the pictures there, and we had a QR code that would link to donate. And then, one thing you always want to be careful of is just seeing if you're going to, if something was a public event, we didn't worry about, I suppose, sharing pictures on our website or on our Facebook page. But if we were going to develop like a brochure or something like that, we always made sure that the kids had releases on file with the school, or that they weren't on the list of families that didn't want their kid photographed or used in any kind of promotional materials. And that's where it helps to have a teacher on, and administration involved with your project if you're doing it from a school, because then they can check that for you and make sure that you're acting in a way that everyone's comfortable. We had a fundraiser tracker that we put at the beginning, at the entrance of the school, and so people could really see where we were at, and that made it kind of fun. And then we gave presentations. I know Ginger mentioned like Chamber of Commerce and those service organizations. So we would start going to the Chamber of Commerce breakfast, and that's really how I got connected with the Rotary and with the Kiwanis. And then we ended up doing presentations for their organizations, and they ended up being a couple of our bigger donors. So that's how we got to know those nice folks. As you can see, there's a picture rendering there that some of our team is standing, that's in front of the school. We put a teddy bear inside one of the little t-shirts, and I got to tell you, that gets a lot of attention, but that people were very excited about the playground. You can see actually two different renderings. So the companies that we got bids from, they were willing to give us big signage to kind of get us excited, right? And then we would share that, and we would just let people know that it wasn't going to be exactly that, what they're going to see there. It wasn't exactly what we'd end up with, but just to give people an idea, and then having them kind of picture it and talk. And it helped generate conversation about, well, like, what would you want to have on your playground when you were talking to kids and things like that. So neither of those, I think, are exactly what we ended up with. But next slide, please. Some of our other events for fundraising, we had a big rummage sale, and that was, we ended up bringing a couple $1,000s that way. And it was really nice because, a lot of it brought the families together, and people were super excited. They could learn more about our project. That was really very successful. We had, like, at one of the run walks, we had worked with a restaurant, the Silver Spring House, and you could, with a 20% coupon, you could go, you're with their sheet, we would get 20% back on all the orders that day. So we had, it really is effective if you're all together for an event, to try to also piggyback it and have another thing that they can go do right after that. And we did that a couple times where we would pass out flyers and say, like a back to school night when they would bring in all your supplies for the year, we would be standing at the door with noodles flyers to go head to Noodles now. They're going to give us 25% off, that kind of 25% of their sales. I mean, so we did that sort of thing. There were just a coffee fundraiser. We timed that at Christmas. So then there'd be gifts, that people might want to purchase coffee for, and they had our logos and things on them. So our two biggest events each year with the foundation were a run walk and then a spring fling, which was a silent auction. And so we had a lot of sponsors for those events, as well as then the silent auction items and things like that. And then of course the admission. We tried to really pick things that I guess there were different price points at too. We really didn't want to have it be where people felt like they weren't a part of it, and in our district, especially, there's quite the range of people's financial situations are kind of at quite a range. So to make sure a lot of the things we had, some things that we did maybe were free with a donation kind of thing. And we really wanted to make sure we were building community. I guess, basically like some events really, you look at it like it's raising money. Some events are more toward raising awareness and building community. In the ideal world, that does all three, right? But that isn't always the case, but it usually will at least help you make some connections that might help you later on. But basically, like anything you do just takes a lot of time to plan, promote, and staff. And I would just say that part's hard. And you have to sometimes think about like, okay, if we put this much time in, what are we going to get out of it, sort of a thing. A lot of times people would come up with me lots of ideas of things we could do. Like, you should totally talk to this, candy company, this place. They're great. I just bought a couple candy bars that have the logo on them, and then some money goes back to the school. Well, if 10% is going back to the school and it was a candy bar, you have to really think about like, how much time do we have? How many people do we have to really help promote something to make it worthwhile? And like I said, sometimes it was all about like, you still wanted to do it because it was building community and awareness. But I do think that especially when you are it's all volunteer driven, and you can get burnout you have to be just mindful of burnout and really be mindful about what you're choosing to put your time and energy into. Other things that helped us a lot were sign up geniuses for the events that we did, so we could get volunteers that way. Some companies were good about sending staff. So like Kohl's, I remember, was particularly good. They would have some of their team members come and volunteer at events, but then they'd also make a donation that went along with that. And that really helped with a lot of the PTO sponsored events. We had a great relationship with Kohl's for that. So those were some of the things that worked well for us. Next slide. Early on, we tried to determine what our donor levels would be. And by that, I mean, like, if you give us this amount, you're going to get this. And so we really tried to figure that out pretty quickly, and not necessarily knowing exactly what the final plaque or artwork or whatever would look like, but just so that when we went to businesses, we could say, you'll have this signage here, you'll be mentioned there, you'll be on our website, we'll promote you on Facebook, we'll thank you here. Like, we had to be very specific. And a lot of some companies didn't totally, they were more about the getting excited about what the playground itself, and others really did look at it as such a that mutually beneficial relationship and making sure that they're getting their name out there, right? And so really being mindful of that. We included in-kind donations on things. So printing gets expensive for events, food for events gets expensive. So some of our donors ended up being like Jet's Pizza. They were really great. They gave us food for a couple different run walks and things. And so they were a donor that was recognized. One of the things we thought a lot about was whether we were going to do an indoor or outdoor location when we would finally thank our donors with either a plaque or artwork or something. And we ended up deciding on indoor because, like, we looked at a couple of the previous playgrounds that had been done and how worn out the signage had become. One was like some bricks that were in the ground, and it just you couldn't read them anymore. I mean, so we tried to think about like long term, what would it look like? And so we decided, and the school agreed that we could use a space at the school to thank our donors. And so then we looked at getting some artwork for that. So the other thing that we had quite a few conversations about was early on, you know, people might want to sponsor a certain piece of equipment, quote unquote, and that we decided not to do because then we'd be locked into figuring out like what equipment specifically it would be that they would be sponsoring, and that would be pretty difficult to determine. And we also determined that there were rules with the warranty about whether you could attach something to that equipment and void your warranty and things like that. There's a lot of little details that go into, I guess, each stage of all of it. And that was one of them. And so we ended up doing, like I said, the indoor display. I have to say, like, it looks nice and everything. So each of those different balloons were different, the different colors represented different donor levels and stuff. But I look back and I think we probably spent too much money on it. And I kind of wish we hadn't, right? Like, it looks really good, but had we maybe had a volunteer who could have just painted that for us, or, you know, a parent who maybe does a lot of woodworking and could do something for us, I think that would have been better, but we didn't have that. And so we ultimately ended up with this lovely piece of artwork that it looks great, but I often wonder, like, maybe we could have done it cheaper. We also thanked our donors in our district newsletter, including all the families and stuff. And I have to say that the spelling piece was a big undertaking. And, you know, the more you have people on your team who can decide, like, you know, if you know somebody who's willing to really get into those Excel spreadsheets and they love them, you know, try to find a parent to volunteer for that. So I think really trying to look at what people's strengths and interests are and bringing those folks in for different key parts of your project can be really helpful, because I think a lot of times it ends up landing on a few people and it gets hard. And then next slide, please. Finally, yeah, we ended up having that big celebration at the last run walk. So it was 2 years after we started the process. The girls, we announced a lot of our bigger donors came and spoke, and we thanked them publicly. And then we did the run walk and had pizza, and it was a lot of games and things like that. It was really fun. And then we got the Girl Scouts involved with cutting the ribbon. We did also just borrow those big scissors. That's the other thing. Anything you can borrow. Like the Kiwanis and Rotary, they're going to have a giant check for you to borrow. You don't have to buy one. You know, somebody's going to have a giant pair of those scissors. Just ask around. If you can get by with not spending money on something, don't. So, but that was our big event at the end, and it was really awesome. Next slide. And then, yeah, so that's my contact info. I just put my email. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. But this sort of shows what 2 years looks like in the process. That's my family. So you can see that they grew quite a bit. You know, that's 2 years in the life of a kid. So if I felt like it took a long time, let me tell you, those kids felt like building the playground took forever. They're all like, when are you building it? When are you building it? So it is a giant commitment, and for the person on the committee as well as their family, because you put in a lot of time doing it. By the time the playground was done, both my kids were over at the middle school, and they weren't actually still at the elementary school where the playground was. That's fine. It didn't matter, but that's that. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Great. So we are going to open it up for questions now. Feel free to either put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask your question. David?
Hi, thanks. Thanks everyone for this really great information. I'm part of the steering committee here in Watertown, and we have an inclusive park in the works. A lot of the preliminary stuff that you've gone through, we've completed as well. Had an initial grant of a few $1,000s, hired a company called Parkitecture that helped us create materials, artist renderings, a little video, some brochures and that sort of thing that kind of got us where we're going. We have the approval of Park and Rec and of the city council, and we've secured at least one major donation. Our project is a little bit larger, I think, than some that I've heard discussed. We're looking at a project that is about 1.7 million. It does include a 1/3 mile paved walking path through some quiet spaces and so on. So and some new restrooms. So it's a big project, but I'm just curious, along with the foundations and private funding, it's already been determined here or announced that our project will be completed 100% by private donations. There will be no tax dollars involved. I'm curious if that has been common with your experience, or if the cities that you are involved with popped in for any of that.
As probably the municipal representative here, I can try to respond to you, David. We were fortunate, as I showed in my budget information, we had city buy-in. When we did our long-term capital plan, Worth Park was on the plan for replacement in kind to the previous playground, which was probably valued at about $250,000. But through our discussions and evaluation, we wanted to add the inclusive feature and really do something grand that would be a destination for not only the people in our community, but people that surround our community to come and gather and play together. So we had 50% in our capital improvement plan. I do know that others have had to raise all their money, and it's a significant challenge because you're chasing it, as Nancy talked about, all day, every day. And you never know when the donors are going to surface. So you can't not close a door at any time. So you have to be at the farmers market. You have to be at Riverfest in Watertown. You have to be at every event you can think of. And you have to have a large enough volunteer pool that has the fire that will keep burning to keep going after it. It is difficult to get corporate money right now if you don't have a connection. Just because they're dealing with so many other things that our world deals with right now, it's more difficult. So you have a, sounds like a wonderful plan, but you got to get a lot of people involved to make this thing go. That's a big dollar amount to raise.
Has that been common in the other communities as well?
I think some communities have had to raise the full amount. I'm not sure it was quite as high as what you're looking at. Ray Maurer from Oshkosh would be a good resource. He did helped with the playground that Ginger was talking about in Oshkosh. He also did the playground called Imagination Station that is in Oconomowoc.
Yeah, I've been there many times.
Yeah, so you're familiar with it. That was the Oconomowoc one was a community build, and I think they had a lot more community fundraising involved. I don't recall if there was any municipal money in that project, but he would be a good resource. He'll probably, well, he'll be gracious. He's a good man. Feel free to reach out to him. He can share you some insight on those two.
And that's Ray
Maurer. He's the parks director for the city of Oshkosh.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much.
At the same time, we were working on fundraising for our playground. The city of Glendale was also putting in a accessible playground and not too far away. So it got a little confusing sometimes with our messaging too. So we didn't end up getting any city of Glendale money for the playground at the school, but then of course the school used some public dollars to put in. And then our city of Glendale was committed to the playground project and, the city playground. So yeah, I would say there was some were public funds in both cases in our area.
Thank you.
So we have a really great question that a couple people are wondering about. How did your community ensure the playground was accessible? Like what expertise? Because if you've worked with disability for a minute, accessible rarely turns out to be truly accessible or inclusive.
What really helped us was just the people who were on our committee. So, having occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, special education, PE teachers, regular ed teachers, and parents of kids with disabilities all involved at the table, so looking at different equipment options and really trying to figure out, first of all, what needs do we want to try to address? What do we want to plan for the future to really try to create a space that's engaging for kids with all different kinds of disabilities? So I'll be honest, I didn't even go to the final playground meetings to pick equipment. I don't have expertise in that. And I was certainly busy with my fundraising efforts. So I didn't pick out any of the equipment. So that's really what we did. And it was particularly, I guess, helpful. And the vendors were very good about, I think, helping us look at different pieces of equipment and look at what type of sensory need certain equipment might meet, excuse me. And so that was helpful, and like what kinds of equipment might do something similar. And then what was the best and what was within our budget, that kind of thing. There was a lot of discussion about swings. I remember that, and making sure we had an accessible one. But the first question was like, some people were not excited about swings because they were afraid people would get hurt. But we ended up with swings. I was definitely in the swings camp. So I hope that helps.
In our case, we actually worked directly with we had a representative on our committee from the Elmbrook School District who specifically works with their special needs programming, who had direct connections with families that had kids that had different needs. And so we used a lot of her connections and community engagement to gather input and feedback on the types of components that were important. There are so many things to consider. And I think in David's comment about Watertown is how they're having a path that creates a quiet zone or some of those things. Playgrounds can be challenging. They're noisy, they're loud. There's a lot of different mechanisms that are being stimulated when kids are there. And so the professionals that design these can help guide you through that process a little bit if you don't have experience. And then relying on people in your community that have family members or people that are involved with this on a day-to-day basis, they can really share real life experiences with you to help your committee understand where you need to go. So it's a difficult thing to navigate. But you have to look at all those angles for you to be successful. And accessibility in what you're trying to accomplish within your community is not the same everywhere. And I think it's important to realize that you're never going to get every single piece to meet every single need of every single person. It's not possible, but you can provide components throughout your playground to meet the various needs that are on the table that your community might be looking for.
That's great. All right, we have several more questions here. Has anyone had experience with state Knowles Nelson stewardship grants to fund inclusive playgrounds or parks and trails? And then are there other state or federal grant programs specific for inclusive recreation spaces that you're aware of?
Did apply for the Knowles stewardship grant. Our application was not just the playground; it included the restroom facility that I alluded to, being a men's and women's and a family changing area. That was all part of the grant application. So our total application cost for the playground and building, et cetera, was close to $2 million. We have some positive feedback from them that we're probably going to receive a small percentage of funding that is more directed towards the restroom facility than it is the playground itself, just based on what the premise behind the stewardship grant and their evaluation process was at that time.
Is there any feedback you can give related to what you put in place to address the needs of those with sensory disabilities, autism, emotional disabilities? I know there's some specific
Yeah.
playground equipment that addresses those needs better.
Yes.
What do you think, Ginger?
Well, like with our playground, we didn't have put up a picture of it, but we do have like a fence around it, and we had people bought tickets. So, and people are like, you can't fence it all in. and make it look like a playpen, right? So, the Parks Department helped us realize and like two of our members, their child was on the autism spectrum, so and we took cues from that and feel like 10 kids kind of want to dart to an opening. So we created 2 or 3 openings in our fence line that one connects to the other playground, one goes out to like a grassy part, and then like our main entrance. And that's how we address autism. And with I've seen in the comments that in the chat that like how did we figure out inclusion? And well, with our committee, we had 2 parents of, well, 3 3 parents with, no, 4 parents with the children with disabilities. Me, myself, having a disability, and a community member that was head of our local CP office for many years.
All right, thank you, Ginger. Let me pull up my chat here again. And I know like we have a park across the street from us and they put in, it's like this ball that fits one person, spins around, it's really popular. And I was told that was something that was supposed to help children with autism or emotional disabilities sort of have their own space while they're having fun.
We have something similar at our playground, and then the swings. They're basic swings, and then we selected a couple that were also accessible for people, you know, to be safe in them. But just the idea of having swings, I guess I was trying to say, some people weren't sure they wanted them. They were afraid people would get kicked or things like that. So we were careful about placement, obviously. But the swings, I think, were pretty popular, have been popular. We also had another like merry-go-round kind of thing that can help for kids who need that kind of input. And I believe the playground structure, it has QR codes on it where you can do different activities and stuff by following, like some of the playgrounds now will have some other types of activities you can also access, or things with your phone and that kind of thing to kind of be led through some activities that can be helpful. So that's my memory of it.
Great. So Deb had put in the chat, if any of you have experience with splash pads, if you'd be willing to connect.
Sorry.
I know in Sussex, they put in a splash pad next to their accessible playground. It's all in the same location. So reaching out to the Sussex Parks and Recreation Division would make some sense, but we don't have any in Brookfield.
I would reach out to Green Mower because after we did our playground a couple years later. They remodeled South Park and connected one of our paths to the splash pad.
Cool. And I know in Milton, which is a pretty small town right next to Janesville, they have a really awesome one. That's a lot of fun. That might be another community to reach out to. So we are at time. I don't know if the speakers are willing to take more questions, but obviously we know if you need to go, feel free to do that. Again, please take that survey. But maybe we can look through the rest of the questions. Kenosha Dream Playground Project has some nice sensory items with the playground if you're looking for ideas. That's good to know. So Brian, who asked about the accessibility, he said he was a little concerned because there are ADA standards. And I know you talked a lot about working with individuals who have expertise or their children have disabilities. I guess I'm wondering too, like the place where you buy the equipment, do they have good ADA standards? What is sort of the backup besides, I think this would be good for kids with autism or a physical disability?
The playground vendors that I've dealt with all have extensive background and knowledge in providing playgrounds that can meet the accessibility challenges for a community. What they'll want to do is sit down and visit with you about what your goals and initiatives are. And then they can start to share with you the different concepts and things that they do. They're very well versed in a variety of different areas, whether it's sensory, physical, whatever it may be. They have game plans within their organization how to address those things. So it's really, they're very, at least the people I've dealt with, they're very willing to have those initial conversations with you, and they can educate you on their background experiences and what their company's objectives can be when it comes to meeting those needs.
David said he had some information on this as well.
Yeah, I just on a kind of a geek level, after 5 decades in the disability field, both pre and post ADA, I just want to quickly remind people that you can have something that is 100% compliant with the ADA and still not be as accessible as you want or need it to be. So before you get too caught up in ADA stuff, always defer back to what these guys have been talking about. Look beyond the professionals and go to people with first-person lived experience, because that is always going to be your #1 goal at the end of it. I will tell you, having a kid with autism on our committee, who, when we looked at paved walking spaces, and there were all kinds of, I mean, they're not all created equally. And for somebody to say, the texture of this one is really bothersome, can we do this instead? No one on the committee would have thought of that. Right. But they were all completely ADA compliant. So I just always go back to first person people. I'll shut up now. Thanks.
No, that's very helpful. And Leah, unfortunately, she put a comment in there that they just have a new play structure that is accessible, but they did not think about the accessible route to access it. Which, John, I appreciate you talking about in, you know, like the pre-planning stage. You need to think about those things up front. Ugh. And then are there recommendations on places that municipalities can start to make all their playgrounds more accessible and inclusive, like building improvements, working it into the maintenance plan in addition to creating the new playground itself?
I think the first thing you want to do from a municipal perspective is identify areas that you need to make those improvements. So there's been some talk about, is there a path that gets you to the playground? Well, that's pretty important, right? But once you get to the playground, are there transition locations to allow people to get into the playground and use it successfully? So there's like steps and layers to get to those particular things. Transition locations in a playground can be a pretty minor cost. It might be absorbed in an operating budget. Something more large or implementation like we're talking about today, that's a whole different concept and takes a lot more time and energy to get it done. So it starts with the evaluation on what you have and identifying opportunities to make improvements and starting to get some cost estimates together. And you might be able to, do some minor changes to 3, 4, 5 playgrounds in your community through your CIP program at a relatively low cost in the big scheme of things, but it makes some of the existing sites a little bit better and more usable. It could be interchanging a swing, for example, from a traditional belt swing to maybe a different style of swing. Is a really simple example, and those swings aren't going to break most organizations' budgets, but it can be a nice way to transfer a playground into another component that's accessible for people.
For those of us not in the know, what is a CIP plan?
Capital improvement plan. I'm
Capital.
sorry. Those are typically larger initiatives that the money may not be part of the operating budget. It might be a borrowed component, and every department, at least in a municipal agency, has a CIP program along with every other department, and then the Common Council will make decisions on what's funded and what's not.
Right. So that looks like the end of the questions, and we are over time. I appreciate this expertise from this panel of speakers. And I hope it was helpful to all of you, and we see more accessible parks popping up everywhere. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.